Hello, my name is Jackie Lung, and I will be presenting my advocacy project on addressing suspension data through behavior support plans. Just to quickly go over the response requirements, I have posed 5 questions throughout this presentation. They are done on separate slides and are highlighted in yellow, which makes them easy to find. I've also sent out a separate Google PowerPoint document, which you can all edit. Go ahead and add a slide for yourself and answer each of the 5 questions on your slide. If you need an example, I've included one on the document with sentence starters, so please refer to that if you have any questions. I wanted to quickly give you guys a quick background of my school so you guys can have some reference throughout this presentation. I work at Animal Watts College Preparatory Academy, which is a direct result of the Locke High School transformation of 2008. Therefore, we are considered a homeschool, which is something I'll touch on in a few slides. Out of the student demographics, we have 500 students, 70% who are Latino and 30% who are African American. All of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch. Roughly 10% of our population is classified as students with special needs, and 25% of them are classified as English learners, all of whom have been classified as English proficient or above. So to kind of get you guys started, since my presentation addresses suspension rates, I'd like you guys to estimate the following. Number 1, based off of LAUSD's data gathered from the 2012-2013 school year, how many suspensions, specifically out-of-school suspensions, do you estimate that my school, Animal Watts, incurred over the last school year? So do you think we had 5, 10, 15 out-of-school suspensions over the entire school year? Just take an estimate. Number 2, LAUSD sets a target rate of suspensions for schools based off of a certain percentage of a school's population. What do you think this rate is? So looking at the example, if the rate is 10% of a school's population and a school has 100 students, then LAUSD is saying that 10 students are allowed to be out of school suspended for the entire year. So a school can only suspend 10 students out of the entire year. Go ahead and jot your estimates down on the separate Google PowerPoint document, and we're going to move on. So this brings me directly to the issue I saw at my school. Last year alone, our campus incurred a total of 416 suspensions, which does consider both in and out of schools. Specifically, we had 189 out-of-school suspensions and 227 in-school suspensions. Out of the 189 out-of-school suspensions, 34% were due to a disruption or defiance, and 32% were due to used force or violence, so something like fighting. LAUSD actually has set the target suspension rate to be just 1% of a school's population. So looking at my school with 500 students, we were technically only allowed 5 out-of-school suspensions for the entire year. And seeing as we had 189 last year, they saw this as not realistic, and so they gave us an alternative of reducing our suspensions by 50% from last year. The problem with our school, in my eyes, is actually is multifold. As a homeschool, we cannot deny admission from any student who shows proof that they live in the community around the school. Therefore, we actually have no control over the types of students we accept, and many students in our area often default to our school when they are not accepted elsewhere. In my eyes, we have many behaviorally challenged students who either get kicked out of charters or do not get accepted into them. In addition, many of our behaviorally challenged students do not have IEPs. They're general education students, and therefore they do not legally qualify for a formalized behavior support plan. This makes it difficult for teachers to properly implement effective interventions for these students, which means that these students are often a disruption, so much so that they get suspended for it. Quickly, this is just some raw data that I pulled up. It shows us the breakdown of suspensions by month and by category. So what's the cause? As you can see, disruption and defiance is quite large, and so is used force or violence. Looking at this graph below, the blue represents disruption or defiance, and the pink represents the used force or violence suspensions over our entire last school year. So this just gives you kind of a picture of that. This also brings me to our advocacy project, which is that along with my special education department, we created a series of 5 professional developments that aims at walking teachers through the BSP creation and implementation process. The hope is that teachers will learn how to create an informal behavior support plan for their most behaviorally challenged students, and to create a system of interventions to address their behavior before it merits a suspension. I had teachers work in heterogeneous groups of 4 based on skill and years of experience to observe and evaluate each other through the process. We had check-ins roughly every 2 to 3 weeks, and this project was carried out during our professional development sessions that our school has twice a week. My third question is just a quick refresher. What is a BSP and who qualifies for it? Go ahead and answer that on the Google PowerPoint document. We're going to move forward as I remind you really quickly that a behavioral intervention plan can be used as a proactive action plan to address behaviors that are impeding learning of the students or others. BSP should focus on understanding why the behavior occurred, then focus on teaching an alternative behavior that meets the student's needs in a more acceptable way. Students with special needs are the ones who qualified for a formalized one, but my project actually seeks to teach teachers how to create informal ones on their own to hopefully have the same impact. Quickly to go over the flow of each of the 5 sessions. The first session, which occurred in January, focused on introducing what a target behavior is and how to identify one using the ABC method that our special education department also uses. I will give examples in a few slides and explain what the ABC method is. Each teacher then selected one target student, and between the first and second session, the other teachers in their group went and observed the student and completed an ABC matrix for that target student. In the second session, teachers brought back their ABC matrices, and teachers used these matrices to identify a target behavior. I then introduced what frequency charting is, and I'll also show you guys in a few slides what that is. In the third session, teachers use the frequency charting and learn to create a BSP along with goals and objectives for their target student. I introduced what behavioral tracking meant and how to set up meetings with their target student to monitor their progress. The fourth and fifth sessions were simply put in place to share progress. My goal was by the end of the 5th professional development session, my vision is for 90% of teachers to have met at least one of their objectives for their target student as created during the 3rd professional development session. As a direct result of this vision, my ultimate goal is to see at least a 50% decrease in the number of out-of-school suspensions resulting from disruption defiance and excessive force or violence by non-SPED students using the data gathered from February 2014 to April 2014 when compared with data gathered from February 2013 to April 2013. I only wanted to use data from February to April because those are the months I ran my professional developments, and I hope that correlation to suspension data would likely be more accurate. To quickly go over some samples from teachers during this process, I have 3 sets of examples, but I'll only go over mine because I'm most familiar with it. When you see them pop up, it's located on the far left. So the first step in the process was to identify a target behavior using the ABC method. The ABC method is essentially tracking student behavior for a certain period of time. The A stands for antecedent, so what is happening before the behavior. The B obviously stands for behavior, and the C stands for consequence. A consequence can be both positive or negative. As you can see from my student on the far left, BO, his target behavior is not shouting out or leaving the classroom, but it's rather that he doesn't follow teacher directives, so instructions, which then escalates to him shouting out or leaving the classroom. The second part was that once we identified the target behavior, teachers then charted how many times a student exhibited that target behavior in a given time. So my student's challenge behavior was not following teacher directives. For me, he did not follow teacher directives 5 times in 10 minutes. This allows teachers to have the quantifiable component for their BSP. With the quantifiable component and basis, teachers then were able to create their informal BSPs with goals and objectives. Here, in this case, my student will follow teacher directives at least 8 out of 10 minutes in class as observed through frequency tracking of 3 teachers. Instead, my students would clarify questions regarding directions with his partner prior to responding with his actions, i.e. shouting out or leaving class. So 3-minute goal for him and my replacement behavior was that he would ask a partner rather than just leave class or shout it directly. As you can see, I also created objectives to help myself and the student ensure that they were on track to meet their goal. This takes me to our last step, which is behavior tracking. So here, in this, teachers simply track the number of times the student used the target behavior and how many times the student successfully used their replacement behavior instead. Throughout time, if you can see, you should see that the replacement behavior increases and that the amount of challenge behavior starts to decrease over time. Although not shown here, teachers also then met with students to talk about his or her progress. So as a result, after the fifth professional development session, only 10 of 25 teachers have met at least one of their objectives for their students. So this did not meet my initial goal of having 50% of teachers meet at least one objective. However, we did see suspension rates drop from 21 out of school suspensions between February 2013 and April 2013 to 4 out of school suspensions between February 2014 to April 2014. This is an 80% drop. Furthermore, disruption and defiance in the classroom dropped to 0 between these months, and used force or violence also dropped significantly. There were also less students with special needs contributing to the suspension data, which shows me that the interventions are beginning to work for our general education behaviorally challenged students, which is ultimately the goal. So some final thoughts and next steps that I heard was that looking at last year's data, we seem to take mostly a reactive approach to our suspension data, meaning that we let things happen and then we reacted to it. We need to continue taking a more proactive approach and providing interventions before a suspendable behavior happens. So something like an informal BSP, we're taking a more proactive approach to address the behavior before it becomes suspendable. We also often identify the wrong target behavior for our students, and therefore we create wrong interventions. So that means that we have to continue using things like the ABC method to look at the overall picture and not assume things like walking out of class is the target behavior. We must continue to provide interventions for our most behaviorally challenged students. And just because a student doesn't have an IEP doesn't mean that we can't apply concepts such as behavior support plans to the general population of students. Lastly, for me, we need to introduce these types of professional developments at the beginning of the year to better build a foundation for both teachers and students to maximize learning. So quickly, 2 final thoughts before we go. Go ahead and please answer these on a separate Google PowerPoint document, Number 1, this is just one of many interventions to help target suspension data. So what are some alternative interventions that could also help reduce suspension rates? And our final thought is, do you think it is fair that LASD places a cap on suspension numbers? So what I mean by that is it fair for schools to get in trouble for having too many suspensions? And what do you think schools are currently doing to meet these numbers? So thank you so much for your time. I hope you all enjoyed my advocacy project.